Hello and welcome to the 10th and last video in this Genesis Bible study series. Today we will be covering Genesis chapters 42 through 50, and this will be about Joseph and his family. My name is John Davis, and I am the Evangelization and Discipleship Coordinator at St. Matthew Catholic Church in Winter Haven, Florida. If you'd like to contact me, you can email me at evangelization@stmcc.com. This Bible study is based off of A Catholic Introduction to the Bible, the Old Testament, by John Bergsma and Brant Petrie. It can be purchased in both Kindle and hardcover at Amazon.com. The Bible study guide that we will be using for this lecture series is Genesis, a Catholic Bible Study by myself, and this can also be purchased on Amazon.com. Genesis chapter 42 verses 1 and 2 say, "When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, 'Why do you keep looking at one another? I have heard,' he said, 'that there is grain in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die.'" Jacob most likely heard this just via word of mouth. And here the Hebrew term shever is used just to refer to food rations. Now, grain was the primary dietary staple in not only ancient Near Eastern cultures, but in farming cultures in general. And here we're seeing that the famine is so severe that these previously active and very spirited men have sunk into despair. And if natural means of preservation were possible, God would not have intervened miraculously like he ends up doing throughout the rest of this story. Genesis chapter 42 verse 4 says, "But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he feared that harm might come of him." So Jacob won't let Benjamin go because he's the only surviving son of his beloved wife Rachel, who was obviously his most favorite. And so the most important thing now is to protect Benjamin, since both Rachel and Joseph are no longer here, at least in Jacob's mind. And the last time that Rachel's son, this would be Joseph, left camp, he never returned. So most likely Jacob has been keeping a close eye on Benjamin this whole time. And we're seeing that even though he showed favoritism towards Joseph, and that led to Joseph's demise, he's doing the same thing with Benjamin, but it doesn't seem to have brought about the demise of Benjamin. Genesis chapter 42 verses 7 and 8 say, "When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke harshly to them. 'Where do you come from?' he said. They said, 'From the land of Canaan, to buy food.' Although Joseph had recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him." This isn't really odd that they didn't recognize him, because remember, it's been 17 years and he was a boy at the time, and now he's a man. So he'd have looked a lot different. Plus, as we talked about last time, he would have had to adopt all the Egyptian characteristics, not only in appearance, but also in their language. And his harsh words are not motivated by vindictiveness. Joseph never seems to have held any grudges against anyone who's ever wronged him, but he's just speaking like the governor, and he is desperate to get information about his father especially. Genesis chapter 42 verse 9 says, "Joseph also remembered the dreams that he had dreamed about them. He said to them, 'You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land.'" It was Joseph's duty to guard against an invasion, and he probably remembered that his brothers and what they did with Shechem and even the violence they showed towards him. And even if he didn't suspect them of having any kind of malicious intentions towards Egypt, he did have a right to ask for an explanation as to why they were there. And he wanted to force them to give a truthful account about his father and Benjamin, since he would have also realized Benjamin wasn't there either. And for all we know, he could have thought they did something to Benjamin like they did to him. Genesis chapter 42 verses 10 and 11 says, They said to him, No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. We are honest men. Your servants have never been spies. The brothers do answer honestly, though Joseph can't be certain of that yet. Genesis chapter 42 verses 12 and 13 say, But he said to them, No, you have come to see the nakedness of the land. They said, We, your servants, are 12 brothers, the sons of a certain man in the land of Canaan. The youngest, however, is now with our father, and one is no more. So the brothers here are kind of explaining to Joseph why there's only 10 of them, because they admit that there were 12. And here Joseph still can't really be certain if they've done something bad to Benjamin. And the last time he was around his brothers, they were obviously still being very deceptive, so they could be being deceptive still, even though it's been almost 20 years. Genesis chapter 42 verses 14 and 15 say, But Joseph said to them, It is just as I have said to you. You are spies. Here is how you shall be tested. As Pharaoh lives, you shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. In ancient cultures, it was common to take an oath by the most powerful authority in the land, and in this case, the king of Egypt, or Pharaoh, who thought of himself as God incarnate, would have been the most powerful. And Joseph is speaking like an Egyptian and probably didn't think of his swearing to Pharaoh as wrong, even though technically his God, the God of his ancestors, would have been way more powerful than Pharaoh ever could possibly dream of being. Genesis chapter 42 verses 16 and 17 say, Let one of you go and bring your brother while the rest of you remain in prison, in order that your words may be tested, whether there is truth in you, or else, as Pharaoh lives, surely you are spies. And he put them all together in prison for 3 days. The Hebrew word used here for prison is mishmar, and it is the same word used previously for where Joseph was imprisoned. Though mishmar does indicate captivity, that doesn't mean that they were held in the exact same place that Joseph was. And he maybe even kept them in his own house. Genesis chapter 42 verses 18 through 20 say, On the third day Joseph said to them, Do this and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here where you are imprisoned. The rest of you shall go and carry grain for the famine of your households, and bring your youngest brother to me. Thus your words will be verified, and you shall not die. And they agreed to do so. While not an obvious statement of faith in the God of Israel, as that would have potentially given away that he was like them from Israel, and the Egyptians had many gods, so he couldn't have just been too obvious. But Joseph is aware that he has to answer to a higher power that is in heaven, and he won't act in a way that goes against justice or good faith. And Joseph's commitment to release the brother left behind when the other brothers come back with Benjamin is just confirmed by his statement here. Genesis chapter 42 verses 21 and 22 say, They said to one another, Alas, we are paying the penalty for what we did to our brother. We saw his anguish when he pleaded with us, but we would not listen. That is why this anguish has come upon us. Then Reuben answered them, Did I not tell you not to wrong the boy? but you would not listen. So now there comes a reckoning for his blood. This conversation occurred while Joseph was present. They were probably using an interpreter up to this point, and the brothers wouldn't have realized that Joseph could understand completely what they were saying. Now, it seems like Reuben still holds the belief that Joseph was dead, so the brothers likely never revealed to Reuben the true actions that they took against Joseph. Genesis chapter 42 verse 24 says, "He turned away from them and wept. Then he returned and spoke to them, and he picked out Simeon and had him bound before their eyes." Simeon was one of Leah's sons, and he was the second oldest brother, and he was among the two who killed all the men of Shechem. If he would have just aligned himself with Reuben and Judah, who were willing to protect Joseph, Simeon could have probably prevented what happened to Joseph over all this time, and maybe Joseph realized this, and so in Joseph's eyes, Simeon was the most guilty, and that's why he kept him. Genesis chapter 42 verse 25 says, "Joseph then gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to return every man's money to his sack, and to give them provisions for their journey. This was done for them." This act of private generosity did not violate Joseph's duty or cheat the government's revenue, because he would have had discretionary power to give away some of the grain. Also, he might have paid for this sum from his own pocket. Genesis chapter 42 verse 27 and 28 says, "When one of them opened his sack to give his donkey fodder at the lodging place, he saw his money at the top of the sack. He said to his brothers, 'My money has been put back. Here it is in my sack.' At this, they lost heart and turned trembling to one another, saying, 'What is this that God has done to us?'" This lodging place would have just been a temporary encampment, not like an inn or anything like that. At this point, the brothers have no reason to suspect that Joseph returned their money, because they don't know who it was, and why would this stranger do something like that? And them discovering the money on their trip home just really heightened their suspicion that God was paying them back for their crime on their brother all those years ago. Genesis chapter 42 verse 29 says, "When they came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them." So the brothers tell Jacob about the misfortunate events that transpired while they were in Egypt, but they do try to spin the story in somewhat of a positive light, because they realize Jacob will probably mistrust them and their ability to care for Benjamin if he goes back. But the brothers really believe that if they're allowed to take Benjamin back, that all the tensions that were there the first time will be resolved, and they'll get more grain and be able to survive this famine. Genesis chapter 42 verse 35 says, "As they were emptying their sacks, there in each one's sack was his bag of money. When they and their father saw their bundles of money, they were dismayed." Only one brother discovered money in their sack on their return trip. Now, as they're all emptying the rest of the grains, each one of them finds that their money is there on top of the grain, and they're all really astonished by this. Genesis chapter 42 verse 36 says, "And their father Jacob said to them, 'I am the one who have bereaved of children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you would take Benjamin. All this has happened to me.'" The brothers kept quiet about finding the money at the lodging place, mainly fearing that their father would blame them for not immediately going back and returning the money. And here we see Joseph kind of exaggerating things, because he's probably overwhelmed and feels some anxiety. And he really probably thought that his children were all being taken away from him rather quickly, and he probably wanted to know when it would ever end. Genesis chapter 42 verse 37 says, "Then Reuben said to his father, 'You may kill my two sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you.'" Reuben never expected his father would accept his proposal. He's kind of over-exaggerating just to show that he'll give the utmost care for the safe returning of Benjamin to his father, and he was just overemphasizing that fact. Genesis chapter 42 verse 38 says, "But he said, My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he alone is left. If harm should come to him on the journey that you are to make, you would bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol." Jacob refuses to allow Benjamin to leave. He's probably trying to cut his losses at only a couple sons. And Jacob may think the grain that they have now will last throughout the famine, because they have no clue as to how long the famine's going to last. Genesis chapter 43 verses 1 and 2 say, "Now the famine was severe in the land, and when they had eaten up the grain that they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, Go again, buy us a little more food." So the severe famine mentioned repeatedly suggests the necessity for more provisions and hints at the future journey to Egypt they're about to undertake. Genesis chapter 43 verses 3 through 5 say, "But Judah said to him, The man solemnly warned us, saying, You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you will send our brother with us, we will go down and buy you food. But if you will not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you." Joseph did warn them that they would be considered spies if they didn't return with Benjamin. And most likely he wouldn't even have seen them. And if he wouldn't see them, there was no way they were going to get grain. So the trip would be pretty fruitless. And it could have put the brothers' lives in danger in that Joseph could have put them in prison again. And at this point, they all had families already, including even Benjamin. Genesis chapter 43 verses 6 and 7 say, "Israel said, Why did you treat me so badly as to tell the man that you had another brother?" They replied, "The man questioned us carefully about ourselves and our kindred, saying, Is your father still alive? Have you another brother?" What we told him was an answer to these questions. Could we in any way know that he would say, "Bring your brother down"? They mentioned their having a brother at home without even the smallest suspicion of doing wrong. Is how could a high-level Egyptian official know anything about them or actually care anything about them? Now, this explanation includes details not found in the brothers' explanation of Jacob in Genesis 42, and the former chapter apparently just presented a summary, and here is just a bit more detail. Genesis chapter 43 verses 8 and 9 say, "Then Judah said to his father Israel, Send the boy with me, and let us be on our way, so that we may live and not die. You and we, and also our little ones. I myself will be surety for him. You can hold me accountable for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, let me bear the blame forever." Benjamin would have been about 24 years old here, and he would have had children of his own, like I already said, and it mentions in Genesis chapter 46. But if Benjamin doesn't make this trip, the entire clan probably will die of starvation. So Judah takes responsibility and offers to be punished if anything happens to Benjamin along this journey. Genesis chapter 43 verses 11 and 12 say, "Then their father Israel said to them, If it must be so, then do this. Take some of the choice fruits of the land in your bags, and carry them down as a present to the man. A little balm and a little honey, gum, resin, pistachio nuts, and almonds. Take double the money with you. Carry back with you the money that was returned in the top of your sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight." Without realizing it, giving those things from home probably would have had an emotional effect on Joseph, as some of that stuff he probably never would have had since he lived there. And Jacob here is trying to demonstrate their honesty by bringing back the money and taking more, just to show that they're not thieves and didn't intentionally steal the money. Genesis chapter 43 verses 13 and 14 say, "Take your brother also, and be on your way again to the man. May God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he may send back your other brother and Benjamin. As for me, if I am bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. Israel leaves the most difficult instruction of taking Benjamin till the very end. And here, Israel is entrusting them all to God's care and accepting what seems to be the heavy burden of potentially losing all of his children. And he prays that this whole event will be turned into something positive. Genesis chapter 43 verse 16 says, when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, bring the men into the house and slaughter an animal and make ready, for the men are to dine with me at noon. So we see here Joseph's gone from a servant to having his own servants. The main meal in Egypt was always served at noon, and the Hebrews would usually eat something during this time and then again have an evening meal. Now, in the past, eating before noon was seen as a sign of intemperance. And even people like Plato were under the opinion of anyone who ate like more than one full meal a day would never be wise or have prudence. Genesis chapter 43 verse 18 says, now the men were afraid because they were brought to Joseph's house. And they said, is it because of the money placed in our sacks the first time that we have been brought in, so that he may have an opportunity to fall upon us, to make slaves of us, and take our donkeys? So fear grips their brothers as they've been singled out from all the other buyers of grain, and you have to realize there probably was long lines of groups of people trying to buy grain. So they're probably wondering, why are we being singled out? And they are fearing that that money that they got when they were returning that was put in their sacks has put them in jeopardy, and they're presuming that Joseph knows about it. Now, they could also be feeling anxiety from the simple fact that where they were living, they didn't live in houses like this. They were mainly just living in tents, and it would have been probably a bit overwhelming to be entering some big house. Genesis chapter 43 verses 20 through 22 say, they said, O my Lord, we came down the first time to buy food, and when we came to the lodging place, we opened our sacks, and there was each one's money in the top of his sack, our money in full weight. So we have brought it back with us. Moreover, we have brought down with us additional money to buy food. We do not know who put our money in our sacks. So the story differs slightly here from the original. In the original, just one brother opened his sack, and here they're saying all of them open their sacks. But sometimes if you're nervous, you say things slightly different, and we don't really know how much time passed between that first journey to this journey, and so they could have just been telling the story slightly different, and that's just how they remembered it now. Genesis chapter 43 verse 23 says, he replied, and this is the steward, rest assured, do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father must have put treasure in your sacks for you. I received your money. Then he brought Simeon out to them. So Joseph has not yet arrived, so their retelling of this story was just to the steward. And the steward's answer implies that he was aware of Joseph's scheme, and it's further supported by his decision to release Simeon to them. Genesis chapter 43 verse 24 and 25 says, when the steward had brought the men into Joseph's house and given them water, and they had washed their feet, and when they had given their donkeys fodder, they made the present ready for Joseph's coming at noon, for they had heard that they would dine there. In the ancient Near East, it was customary to offer water to wash one's feet, and that was a welcome gesture whenever someone was coming into your house. It's also practical in that people were wearing sandals back then, and you were more likely to get dirt and things on your feet. So if you wanted a clean floor and a clean house, you probably would want people to wash their feet upon entering your house. Genesis chapter 43 verses 26 through 28 says, when Joseph came home, they brought him the present that they had carried into the house, and bowed to the ground before him. He inquired about their welfare and said, is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke? Is he still alive? They said, "Your servant our father is well. He is still alive." And they bowed their heads and did obstinence. All Joseph's brothers bowed down to him, just like in the initial prophecy that he told them that kind of got him in trouble and started this whole narrative to play out in the way it did. Genesis chapter 43 verse 29 says, "Then he looked up and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, 'Is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke to me? God be gracious to you, my son.'" Joseph is probably still using an interpreter like he did earlier. And until now, he hasn't spoken in this manner like he does to Benjamin, which is, "God be gracious to you, my son." He's probably doing that because Benjamin is his only full brother. Genesis chapter 43 verse 30 and 31 says, "With that Joseph hurried out, because he was overcome with affection for his brother, and he was about to weep. So he went into a private room and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out, and controlling himself, he said, 'Serve the meal.'" The Hebrew expression for overcome with affection is found only in one other place in the Bible, and that's in 1 King chapter 3 verse 26, where the context of it indicates compassion. So a meal is hosted by Joseph for his brothers. That would have been customary for the times. The situation ironically mirrors how his brothers had kind of callously discussed his fate and sat down to eat after they threw him into a pit. Genesis chapter 43 verses 33 and 34 say, "When they were seated before him, the firstborn, according to his birthright, and the youngest, according to his youth, the men looked at one another in amazement. Portions were taken to them from Joseph's table, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of the others. So they drank and were merry with him." Joseph might be testing his brothers by showing preference towards Benjamin to see if it triggers any kind of envy among his siblings. We saw earlier that it's pretty obvious that Jacob is now favoring Benjamin. Now, shakar, the Hebrew verb used here for marry, often refers to intoxication in other parts of the Bible, but it's unlikely that Joseph's brothers would have indulged in such excess, as they were still kind of unsure of who they were dealing with, and were still probably somewhat fearful, especially with how Joseph dealt with them previously. Genesis chapter 44 verses 1 and 2 say, "Fill the men's sack with food, as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in the top of his sack. Put my cup, the silver cup, in the top of the sack of the youngest, with his money for the grain." And he did as Joseph told him. So Joseph's going to repeat his previous trick from Genesis chapter 42, but this time he's going to make sure that the brothers get caught instead of making it home. Now, this reference of a silver cup is also ironic in that Joseph was sold for 20 pieces of silver, and now he's using a silver object to test them and kind of make them panic. And Joseph, by focusing on Benjamin, is going to really intensify the brothers' panic. Genesis chapter 44 verses 4 and 5 say, "When they had gone only a short distance from the city, Joseph said to his steward, 'Go, follow after the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, Why have you returned evil for good? Why have you stolen my silver cup? Is it not from this that my Lord drinks? Does he not indeed use it for divination? You have done wrong in doing this.'" Though Joseph seems to imply that he does use divination, the narrative never explicitly states that he practices it, and most likely Joseph spoke this way because all the Egyptians most likely thought of him as someone who did use divination, since he was able to predict this famine that is currently occurring. Genesis chapter 44 verses 6 through 8 say, "When he overtook them, he repeated these words to them. They said to him, 'Why does my Lord speak such words as these? Far be it from your servants that they should do such a thing. Look, the money we found at the top of our sacks we brought back to you from the land of Canaan. Why then would we steal silver or gold from your Lord's house? The brothers communicate their disbelief at this kind of incomprehensible accusation because they know they wouldn't do something like this. And it had to be difficult and probably humiliating for them to be constantly suspected of doing these evil acts that they know they weren't doing. Genesis chapter 44 verses 9 and 10 say, "Should it be found with any one of your servants, let him die. Moreover, the rest of us will become my Lord's slaves." He said, "Even so, in accordance with your words, let it be. He with whom it is found shall become my slave, but the rest of you shall go free." Property crime of this nature was not punishable by death in either the Old Testament or any known Egyptian laws. And we see Jacob make a similar rhetorical assertion to prove his innocence after he was accused of theft by Laban. Now, Joseph insists on only the detention of the culprit and no one else, mainly because he knows it's going to be Benjamin. And Joseph wants to test his brothers concerning Benjamin and see what their current attitude towards him is. Are they going to feel suffering and feel pain that Benjamin's going to be basically become a slave like Joseph did? And he's doing this because he did treat them less favorable than Benjamin at the dinner. And he also might want to protect his younger brother from harm if they were inclined to mistreat him because he was favored at the dinner earlier. Genesis chapter 44 verses 12 and 13 say, "He searched, beginning with the eldest and ending with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. At this they tore their clothes. Then each one loaded his donkey, and they returned to the city." Benjamin's sack was not immediately opened by Joseph's steward because he was aware of the deceit. Joseph obviously would have told him about it. So even though the brothers are upset, they don't condemn Benjamin. They don't say, "Why did you steal the cup? Why did you do this?" And the brothers are determined either to clear him of this crime or never to return home, since they're not going to be going back with Benjamin. Genesis chapter 44 verses 14 and 15 say, "Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house while he was still there, and they fell to the ground before him. Joseph said to them, 'What deed is this that you have done? Do you not know that one such as I can practice divination?'" As he was the one who vowed to accept responsibility for Benjamin, Judah is going to lead the defense here. And it could have been maybe he was the most articulate and best speaker of the bunch. Joseph, though, once again speaks of himself as a divinator, even if he didn't practice it, because it's kind of what he was esteemed for in Egypt. But Joseph says time and time again that he knows that it's the one true God who gave him this unparalleled knowledge, especially in comparison to the Egyptian sorcerers. Genesis chapter 44 verses 16 and 17 say, "And Judah said, 'What can we say to my Lord? What can we speak? How can we clear ourselves? God has found out the guilt of your servants. Here we are then, my Lord's slaves, both we and also the one in whose possession the cup has been found.' But he said, 'Far be it from me that I should do so. Only the one in whose possession the cup was found shall be my slave. But as for you, go up in peace to your father.'" Starting with just humbleness, Judah admits that God is punishing them for some wrongdoing. And this could be referring to their collective guilt for stealing the divination cup. So basically, the brothers are sticking together and they're not just blaming Benjamin. That's a great sign that they've kind of reformed in their ways. More likely, though, he realizes, Judah that is, that the heinous crime they committed against Joseph all those years ago is what they're being punished for now. And the brothers do seem to harbor guilt for the way they mistreated Joseph, and I'm sure this is coming through to Joseph as he hears this explanation. Genesis chapter 44 verses 18 through 20 say, Then Judah stepped up to him and said, O my lord, let your servant please speak a word in my lord's ear, and do not be angry with your servant. For you are like Pharaoh himself. My lord asked his servant, saying, Have you a father or a brother? And we said to my lord, We have a father, an old man, and a young brother, the child of his old age. His brother is dead. He alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him. Judah's perceiving that he's dealing with someone who's fair, and he acknowledges him as a second behind only Pharaoh, mainly saying that he knows that this person, that Joseph, will be able to be the one to set down this punishment. Rachel at this point has been dead about 24 years, and we know since she died in childbirth, that makes Benjamin, as we've already kind of discussed, 24 years old. Genesis chapter 44 verses 33 and 34 say, Now therefore, please let your servant remain as a slave to my lord in place of the boy, and let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the suffering that would come upon my father. So the essence of Judah's appeal here is to let him stay in Benjamin's place. It's not really to say they're not guilty. And I think this really helps Joseph realize that his brothers have changed. The Hebrew word used for suffering here, ra, can refer to wickedness and moral evil. We see that in a couple places in the Bible. But can also mean calamity or tragedy in a couple other places in the Bible. So most likely that's the meaning of suffering here, is that it'll be a calamity or a tragedy. And Judah is concerned that his father, and Joseph of course, would suffer greatly if Benjamin was to be lost. And Joseph believes what Judah's saying, so Judah must have been very trustworthy and sounding honest as he spoke. Genesis chapter 45 verse 1 says, Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, Send everyone away from me. So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. The two other emotional breakdowns Joseph had, he was able to get away and not start crying in the presence of his brothers. But in this case, I think it struck him so deeply that he couldn't control himself and get away, so he started crying. So he's finally reached a point where he can no longer keep his identity hidden from his brothers. Genesis chapter 45 verse 3 says, Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, so dismayed were they at his presence. Joseph has to repeat himself a second time of saying who he is because his brothers are shocked so much. Now the Hebrew verb used for dismayed is bahal, and that refers to a state of terror. We see that in numerous places throughout the Bible. So the brothers were so in shock that, in a way, they were fearful of. It's almost like probably seeing someone who you feel is dead walking around. Genesis chapter 45 verses 4 and 5 say, Then Joseph said to his brothers, Come closer to me. And they came closer. He said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. The Hebrew verb used for closer, nagash, means to come close, and it's used earlier to describe the brothers as they approach Joseph on two different occasions. So when this always happens, it's them approaching Joseph, not Joseph approaching them. And Joseph's attempting to soothe and reassure them. He doesn't want his brothers to have regret as to what happened, because he realizes that God is responsible for all this kind of pain and bad that's been happening to him, but that God turned that into something good. Genesis chapter 45 verses 6 and 7 say, For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are 5 more years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. Joseph's brothers were probably surprised by his knowledge of the detail of 5 more years, although maybe they shouldn't have been, because they probably now would realize that his initial dream that he had about them had come true. And once again, Joseph is just reiterating his conviction that God is responsible for everything that has taken place, and that if this hadn't happened, that Joseph and his brothers and his whole family might have starved and might have died. So that this was really important that this all happened in the way it did. Genesis chapter 45 verse 8 says, So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Egyptians other than Pharaoh were attributed with similar titles in Egyptian literature of being called the father to Pharaoh. It could have been the Pharaoh's physical father, or just a tutor, or even a father-in-law. And Joseph was probably granted this title as an honorary distinction for earning Pharaoh's favor by predicting all this famine and setting up a way to make it so the Egyptians didn't struggle so much during it. Genesis chapter 45 verses 16 through 18 say, Pharaoh and his servants were pleased. Pharaoh said to Joseph, Say to your brothers, Do this, load your animals and go back to the land of Canaan. Take your father and your households and come to me, so that I may give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you may enjoy the fat of the land. Joseph's conduct throughout this famine made everyone so happy that they rejoiced in whatever pleased Joseph. And perhaps they believed that his relatives would be like him and be beneficial to Egypt. As we talked about previously, good people have good things happen to others around them as well. And Pharaoh has basically granted Joseph's request to move his family to Egypt. And the fat of the land that they're going to enjoy describes basically the wealth that the land or soil can generate, so it's crops. So they're going to be able to grow crops and benefit from all that Egypt has to offer. Genesis chapter 45 verses 19 and 20 say, You are further charged to say, Do this, take wagons from the land of Egypt for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father and come. Give no thought to your possessions, for the best of all the lands of Egypt is yours. The Pharaoh assures them that they really only need to worry about bringing their people during this transportation to Egypt, not their belongings, because the best of the land has been promised to them by Pharaoh himself, and that will exceed anything that they could possibly bring with them. Genesis chapter 45 verses 22 and 24 say, To each one of them he gave a set of garments, but to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 sets of garments. Then he sent his brothers on their way, and as they were leaving he said to them, Do not quarrel along the way. This event mirrors the beginning of the saga when Jacob gave Joseph a new garment, that coat of many colors, and it was customary to bestow on friends garments of distinction. And in cases where the clothing was equally good, the value of these gifts lies in their quantity. So all the coats were probably equivalent, but he gave Benjamin 5 of them. And that really just indicates the love that Joseph has for Benjamin. And Joseph senses that his brother's newfound amiable temper would allow him to safely show favor to his mother's son, or his full brother Benjamin. Now Joseph warns them to not worry too much and quarrel along the way, because he anticipates that they'll probably talk a little bit about their involvement of his sale to Egypt during their journey home, and maybe they will bicker some about who was more at fault. And he also understands that they're going to have to most likely tell their father about it, so there's going to have to be discussions on the way home. And he just doesn't want them quarreling about it, basically not to worry about it. Genesis chapter 45, verses 26 through 28 say, "And they told him, Joseph is still alive. He is even ruler over all the land of Egypt. He was stunned. He could not believe them. But when they told him all the words of Joseph that he had said to them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. Israel said, Enough, my son Joseph is still alive. I must go and see him before I die." It's unclear whether Joseph or his brothers really ever did talk to Jacob about how Joseph ended up in Egypt. There's no indication that they did, but we just don't know that for sure. Now, Jacob's sole focus is to reunite with Joseph, who he's believed to be dead for all these years, and Jacob wastes no time embarking on the journey to Egypt after recovering from the shock of learning that Joseph is alive and now is really esteemed and has a lot of power. Genesis chapter 46 verses 1 and 2 say, "When Israel set out on his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here I am. The story switches back and forth between his birth name of Jacob and the name God bestowed upon him, Israel. We even see God himself calling him Jacob. Now, the reason for Jacob stopping here is unclear, but this location is mentioned in other patriarchal narratives and would have been considered one of those places or locations that you could communicate with God. Now, visions of the night probably means a dream, but it's not the usual Hebrew word for dreaming, which is chalom. Genesis chapter 46 verses 3 and 4 say, "Then he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you a great nation there. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again. In Joseph's own hand shall close your eyes." God just reassures Jacob that he's not going to forfeit the promise of the divine covenant by leaving the promised land. He's given him permission to, and he's also saying that he will basically be there with him, which seems a bit odd in that God is omnipresent. You think he'd be everywhere, but it is noteworthy when considering that sacred geography, and like we saw with Beersheba on the last slide, the belief that God really communicates and is in some specific spots more than others. And the Israelites do hold the belief that the God of Israel does permit certain foreign nations and areas to be kind of quote unquote ruled by other gods after the Babel event. Genesis chapter 46 verses 29 and 30 say, "Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to meet his father Israel in Goshen. He presented himself to him, fell on his neck, and wept on his neck a good while. Israel said to Joseph, I can die now, having seen for myself that you are still alive." Joseph didn't drive a chariot to show off or to be proud, while his father's family's traveling in some simple wagons, but Joseph had to appear in public with the appropriate carriage that matched his status. He had to dress a certain way and look a certain way because of his status. Now, this reunion with Joseph has brought Jacob complete joy and fulfillment, so now he feels like he could die a happy man. Genesis chapter 46 verses 33 and 34 say, "When Pharaoh calls you and says, What is your occupation? You shall say, Your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth, even until now, both we and our ancestors, in order that you may settle in the land of Goshen, because all shepherds are abhorrent to the Egyptians. The reason behind why Egyptians had a low social esteem for shepherds is unclear. It could be that foreign herdsmen were seen as competition for the resources by the Egyptians, basically suggesting a general dislike for Canaanite foreigners. And this would have been amplified during a famine like they were going through right now. They may also have hated these foreigners because they killed and ate sheep, and the Egyptians didn't do this. They considered sheep sacred, and they really only used them for their wool, and they did not eat them. Genesis chapter 47 verses 3 and 4 say, Pharaoh said to his brothers, "What is your occupation?" And they said to Pharaoh, "Your servants are shepherds, as our ancestors were." They said to Pharaoh, "We have come to reside as aliens in the land, for there is no pasture for our servants' flocks, because a famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Now we ask you, let your servants settle in the land of Goshen." The Hebrew term ger, that connects Jacob's migration and his family with God's prophecy to Abraham that we saw in Genesis chapter 15, verse 13. According to that prophecy, Abraham's descendants would be strangers in Egypt before their oppression. And residing in Goshen, maybe Joseph really wants his family to kind of stay away from Egypt, or as far away as possible, to prevent them from being corrupted by the pagan culture of Egypt. Genesis chapter 47 verses 5 and 6 say, Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Settle your father and your brothers in the best part of the land. Let them live in the land of Goshen. And if you know that there are capable men among them, put them in charge of my livestock." The language used by Pharaoh in the above statement is similar to that of a formal decree, and it's basically giving permission for Joseph's family to live in Goshen. And this is a personal favor to Joseph from Pharaoh, because overseeing the king's livestock would bring about an increase in all of Joseph's family's social standing, and they would get a bunch of extra legal perks that would come with that increase in standing. Genesis chapter 47 verses 8 through 10 say, Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How many are the years of your life?" Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The years of my earthly sojourn are 130. Few and hard have been the years of my life. They do not compare with the years of the life of my ancestors during their long sojourn." Then Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from the presence of Pharaoh. Though Jacob lived 130 years, he says he's only lived a few, because he knew his life was coming close to an end, and his father had lived 180 years, and other ancestors of his had lived over 900, so in his mind, 130 aren't that many. Now, he deems his life evil as he's been plagued almost constantly with hardships. And one could make an argument that it started even from the womb, when he didn't end up being the firstborn. Genesis chapter 47 verses 13 and 14 say, Now there was no food in all the land, for the famine was very severe. Joseph collected all the money to be found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, in exchange for the grain that they bought, and Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. Joseph has collected an ample food reserve during those 7 years of abundance, but the Egyptians are incapable of producing or acquiring food on their own. So people purchase grain from him since they can't really produce it on their own. And the initial resource that Joseph accumulates from Egypt then ends up being all their money. Genesis chapter 47 verses 15 and 16 say, When the money from the land of Egypt and from the land of Canaan was spent, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, Give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? For our money is gone. And Joseph answered, Give me your livestock, and I will give you food in exchange for your livestock, if your money is gone. So the second resource Joseph collects from the people of Egypt is their livestock. Now, this could have been the wisest course of action on Joseph's part for preserving the livestock, in that the government could use their resources to feed them. The people were running out of ways to feed them, and they could have all starved if Joseph hadn't, quote unquote, bought them. And it's probable that the people received their livestock back after the famine ended so they could resume farming. Genesis chapter 47 verses 18 and 19 say, They came to him the following year and said to him, We cannot hide from my Lord that our money is all spent, and the herds of cattle are my Lord's. There is nothing left in the sight of my Lord but our bodies and our land. Shall we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land in exchange for food. We with our land will become slaves of Pharaoh. Now the third and fourth resources Joseph buys from the people in exchange for food are their land and finally themselves. So now Pharaoh possesses all the people's money, livestock, land, and people. But really, what's the alternative, right? You could do this or die of starvation, so the people really didn't have much of a choice. Genesis chapter 47 verses 23 and 24 say, Then Joseph said to the people, Now that I have this day bought you and your land for Pharaoh, here is seed for you, sow the land, and at the harvest you shall give 1/5 to Pharaoh, and 4/5 shall be your own, as seed for the field, and as food for yourselves and your households, and as food for your little ones. So the government purchases the land, and then this will be followed by the distribution of seed for the first crops after the famine. Now the individuals will still be able to inhabit the lands, but now they're going to have to pay rent with their crops, and that'll be the 1/5. And it's kind of similar to how things are still done in certain areas of Egypt today. Genesis chapter 47 verses 25 and 26 say, They said, You have saved our lives. May it please my Lord. We will be slaves of Pharaoh. So Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt, and it stands to this day, that Pharaoh should have the 5th. The land of the priests alone do not become Pharaoh's. Joseph's reforms came at a great cost for the people, but they're thankful to him for providing food and basically sustaining their families and keeping them alive. Now where it says stands to this day, this would have been during the time of the sacred author, which would have probably been Moses or around the time of Moses. And we even see that this was still in practice all the way to the time of Josephus, who was around in the 100s AD. Genesis chapter 47 verse 28 says, Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the days of Jacob, the years of his life, were 147 years. Now it's unclear why Jacob and his family did not leave Egypt after the famine, but as we see, they didn't. They stayed. Genesis chapter 47 verses 29 and 30 say, When the time of Israel's death drew near, he called his son Joseph and said to him, If I have found favor with you, put your hand under my thigh and promise to deal loyally and truly with me. Do not bury me in Egypt. When I lie down with my ancestors, carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place. He answered, I will do as you have said. Joseph swore by putting his hand under Jacob's thigh, just like Abraham's steward did in Genesis chapter 24. And Jacob hoped that his people would return to the promised land of Canaan, and that was needed to be done for the promise in a way to take place, that we see the covenantal promise in Genesis 15. And Jacob wants to be buried where both Abraham and Isaac were. Genesis chapter 48 verse 1 says, After this Joseph was told, Your father is ill. So he took with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Joseph was urgently summoned and brought his 2 sons along. So this is probably going to be the end of Jacob. Genesis chapter 48 verses 3 through 5 say, And Jacob said to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz, in the land of Canaan. And he blessed me, and said to me, I am going to make you fruitful and increase your numbers. I will make of you a company of peoples, and will give this land to your offspring after you for a perpetual holding. Therefore, your 2 sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt, before I came to you in Egypt, are now mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are. So the covenant terms established by God with Abraham and then also with Isaac and Jacob are basically being restated in this passage. And Joseph's 2 sons are being adopted by his father Israel. And they'll be the heads of 2 of the 12 tribes of Israel. Genesis chapter 48 verses 9 and 10 say, Joseph said to his father, They are my sons whom God has given me here. And he said, Bring them to me, please, that I may bless them. Now the eyes of Israel were dim with age, and he could not see well. So Joseph brought them near him, and he kissed them and embraced them. The blessing Jacob received from his father is going to be passed down here to Joseph's sons. Genesis chapter 48 verses 13 and 14 say, Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand towards Israel's left, and Manasseh in his left hand towards Israel's right, and brought them near him. But Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was younger, and his left hand on the head of Manasseh, crossing his hands, for Manasseh was the firstborn. Joseph arranged his sons to have Jacob's right hand, which signified a ruling over the others and dominance on Manasseh, his firstborn. But for the blessing, Jacob crosses his hands. And this is just foreshadowing that Ephraim's tribe will have superiority in glory and numbers over his brother's tribe. Genesis chapter 48 verses 17 and 18 say, When Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. So he took his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Joseph said to his father, Not so, my father, since this one is the firstborn, put your right hand on his head. Joseph probably thought his father placed the hands in that order by mistake, because his father was pretty blind at this stage of the game. Now, he does suggest his thoughts and feelings to his father, but he will agree to this decision. And it just shows that even the greatest of prophets are not always under actual inspiration all the time. Genesis chapter 48 verses 19 and 20 say, But his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations. So he blessed them that day. By you, Israel will invoke blessings, saying, God make you like Ephraim and like Manasseh. But he put Ephraim ahead of Manasseh. Whereas Manasseh will become a people, Ephraim will become a multitude, very similar to what we see with Isaac versus Ishmael. And the language here really reflects that covenantal promise. And the way things eventually play out does justify how this event played out, as Ephraim is at the forefront of the 10 tribes and were considered the strongest and bravest of the tribes. Genesis chapter 48 verse 21 says, Then Israel said to Joseph, I'm about to die, but God will be with you and will bring you again to the land of your ancestors. The plural form of you is used here in the Hebrew text, which suggests that Joseph's blessing applies to the entire nation of Israel, not just Joseph. And Jacob did purchase land at Shechem. We see that in chapter 33. And Joseph will later be buried there, much later, actually. Genesis chapter 49 verses 1 and 2 say, Then Jacob called his sons and said, Gather around, that I might tell you what will happen to you in days to come. Assemble and hear, O sons of Jacob. Listen to Israel, your father. Jacob's blessings and curses speak about the distant future of the 12 tribes of Israel. And in this way, his words in this chapter function prophetically. So they're not really about the sons themselves. They're about the tribes that will be named after them. Genesis chapter 49 verses 3 and 4 say, Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and the first fruits of my vigor, excelling in rank and excelling in power. Unstable as water you shall no longer excel, because you went up into your father's bed. Then you defiled it. You went up onto my couch. The eldest child was to receive double the inheritance and have authority over their siblings, but Reuben is disqualified because of his transgression. And although sexual immorality may not have warranted this kind of demotion, because Judah is not demoted for his actions with Tamar, Reuben's actions were more an attempt to take over his father's leadership of the tribe and really to dishonor him. Now, this was not a curse, but a prophecy that basically indicates the tribe of Reuben would not receive the usual privileges of a firstborn, so they won't have twice what the other tribes have. Genesis chapter 49 verses 5 through 7 say, Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. May I never come into their counsel. May I not be joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men, and at their whim they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. They killed men is kind of prophetically alluding to Jesus, whom the Levitical priests, which come from Levi, put to death. Now, Levi gets no division allotted to him, as the Levitical priests only have cities within the other tribes. And then Simeon only really gets a very small part of Judah's lot, and his descendants are actually forced to seek other establishments at other places in the Bible. Now, Simeon's tribe alone was not blessed by Moses. Genesis chapter 49 verses 8 through 9 say, Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's son shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He crouches down. He stretches out like a lion, like a lioness. Who dares rouse him up? Judah gets priority over his brothers because the first three were excluded from that firstborn blessing. Now, the term lion in the Old Testament refers to strength and cunning, and the title Lion of Judah that we see in Revelation comes from this blessing. The Lion of Judah became a messianic symbol because Micah chapter 5 verse 2 connects Judah with the coming of the ruler of Israel. Genesis chapter 49 verse 10 says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and the obedience of the people is his. All the ancient Jewish traditions, scribes, scholars agree with the Christians that this contains a prediction of the Messiah and points out the period of his coming. And Jacob foretells that Christ would make his appearance once the Jews fell under a foreign yoke. Some say that that would have been with Herod, right when Jesus was born. Others say that maybe it was after the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. Genesis chapter 49 verse 11 says, binding his foal to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine, he washes his garments in wine and his robe in the bloods of grape. So the Messiah, born of Judah, will connect the Jews and the Gentile to himself, which is the vine. And the Messiah shall wash his robe, which is his flesh, and his garment, which will be his disciples, in his old blood, adorning them with all the graces by means of his death. And this will be applied to all their souls in the sacrament of the Eucharist, which we receive at Mass, where Jesus' blood is offered under the appearance of wine. Genesis chapter 49 verse 12 says, his eyes are darker than wine and his teeth whiter than milk. This image conveys that no place or no people could compare with Jesus and what he will accomplish. And Jesus Christ alludes to this prophecy of Jacob in Matthew chapter 21 and also in John verse 10. And the Jews are told by him that the kingdom of God will be taken away from them and that a single fold will be established for everyone. God will then cease to distinguish the Jews from others and would no longer exclusively be the Jewish people's king and shepherd, that God would now be the king and shepherd for everyone. Genesis chapter 49 verses 22 through 24 say, Joseph is a fruitful bough by a spring. His branches run over the wall. The archers fiercely attacked him. They shot at him and pressed him hard, yet his bow remained taut, and his arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, by the name of the shepherd, the rock of Israel. Fruitful denotes the extraordinary increase that the tribes that come from Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh will end up attaining. And according to Jacob here, Joseph has been a victim of envy and then revenge, temptation, and just ingratitude. And we saw that throughout this Joseph narrative, that how he was treated. And yet, despite all this opposition, he was still able to triumph, and is the main reason Israel is going to be able to be successful going forward. And this is all by the grace of God. In the next few verses, now he's going to bestow lots of blessings on his beloved son Joseph, and these blessings will be fully realized in the history of the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. Genesis chapter 49 verse 28 says, all these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father said to them when he blessed them, blessing each one of them with a suitable blessing. Mostly blessings, though, because some were just predictions in that Reuben didn't receive a blessing. And as I already said, these prophetic words mainly pertain to the tribes of Israel themselves, not the actual sons. Genesis chapter 49 verses 29 and 33 say, then he charged them, saying to them, I am about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my ancestors in the cave in the field of Ephron the Hittite. When Jacob ended his charge to his sons, he drew up his feet into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. This charge had already been given and solemnly undertaken by Joseph when he put his hand under Jacob's thigh. And there is a possibility that he received some supernatural strength when he gave out these patriarchal blessings and prophecies. And then once it was over, the divine strength stopped and he passed away to join his ancestors. Genesis chapter 50 verses 1 and 2 say, Joseph commanded the physicians in his service to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. They spent 40 days in doing this, for that is the time required for embalming, and the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. Embalming was an honor mainly for kings or really high level officials. Now, during the embalming, certain organs were taken out by the embalmer during the first 30 days, and then the body is left in salt and various drugs for another 40. So in all, it does take 70 days, and the sacred author talks about 70 days. Now, before any person in Egyptian society was buried, he was praised, and then whatever evil they had done would also be mentioned. And if your evils were so bad, then a lot of times that could mean that you weren't going to a good place in the afterlife. Genesis chapter 50 verses 10 and 11 say, when they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, they held there a very great and sorrowful lamentation. And he observed the time of mourning for his father 7 days. When the Canaanite inhabitants of the land saw the mourning on the threshing floor of Atad, they said, "This is a grievous mourning on the part of the Egyptians." This place was called Atad because it was surrounded by thorns, and it was on the border between Egypt and Canaan. Now, while the family of Jacob probably went ahead to the burial site, the Egyptians stopped at this location, and they might not have even went any further. Now, this procession must have been very large because the Canaanites take notice of how large it is, which shows how important Joseph was in that his father was getting all this attention. Genesis chapter 50 verse 15 says, realizing that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers said, "What if Joseph still bears a grudge against us and pays us back in full for all the wrong that we did to him?" Joseph's brothers grow worried because now that their father is dead, maybe now would be the time for Joseph to exact some revenge on him. Genesis chapter 50 verses 16 and 17 say, "So they approached Joseph, saying, 'Your father gave this instruction before he died. Say to Joseph, I beg you, forgive the crime of your brothers and the wrong they did in harming you. Now therefore, please forgive the crime of the servants of the God of your father.' Joseph wept when they spoke to him." Perhaps they had Benjamin approach Joseph, and the brothers' plea is not based on their kinship relationship to Joseph, but on their father's relationship to God, the God of Israel. The brothers likely word their plea this way because they feel they've kind of forfeited any kind of brotherly relationship with Joseph because of the way that they treated him. And we see Joseph was deeply affected by this communication. And he'll give them the strongest assurance of his forgiveness, just as Jesus forgave his enemies on the cross. So you kind of see that this is another example of a prefiguration of Joseph and Jesus, in that Joseph fully forgives his brothers for all they did against him, and Jesus does the same thing from the cross. Genesis chapter 50 verses 20 and 21 say, "Even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good, in order to preserve a numerous people, as he is doing today. So have no fear. I myself will provide for you and your little ones." In this way he reassured them, speaking kindly to them. Joseph basically reiterates again that he understands this was God's plan all along, and they should understand that as well. Not really to take blame away from them, because they still did what they did willingly, but God was able to use their evil and have good come from it. Genesis chapter 50 verses 22 and 23 say, "So Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years. Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation, children of Machir, son of Manasseh, were also born on Joseph's knees." So Joseph's age of 110 might not have been an exact number of years. Egyptians saw 110 as a perfect lifespan, and that was used as an honorific age of someone who was great, and maybe the sacred author is using that because of that, since he lived in Egypt for so long. Joseph had been governor of the lands of Egypt for 80 years by the time he was 110. Now, we see that Joseph actually adopts the only son of Machir, just like his children were adopted by Jacob, but it doesn't explain why. Genesis chapter 50 verse 24 says, "Then Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will surely come to you and bring you up out of this land, to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." This statement is basically foreshadowing the Exodus, and it's not going to be 400 years before they leave, but eventually they will. Now, the Egyptians would have been opposed to his burial in Canaan. So if the corpse of Joseph had been removed out of Egypt immediately, as was done with Jacob, Joseph's brothers might have been persecuted because of it. So he would have them to keep his bones till the time of their departure, because he knew eventually God would restore them to the land of Canaan like he promised. Genesis chapter 50 verses 25 and 26 say, So Joseph made the Israelites swear, saying, When God comes to you, you shall carry up my bones from here. And Joseph died, being 110 years old. He was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. The Israelites fulfill this vow of burying him in Canaan once they actually leave during the Exodus. And coffin usage was definitely a distinctive Egyptian custom. And Joseph would have received a funeral in the grandest Egyptian style, and his mummified body would have been preserved until the Exodus, because he was not only a powerful man, but he was a very important man in that he got them through this major famine. And that's it for this last video in the Genesis Bible Study series. I'd like to thank everyone who made it to the end, and hopefully you understand Genesis better than when you started watching these videos. Thank you again, and bye.